we have a new set. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm the Sci-Fi Dog Lady, and as you can see I have totally changed my setting. This is probably one of the reasons why I took a little bit longer to come back. I've been redecorating, I've been working, obviously I've been doing many things. And I've also decided to go for other kind of videos, not only from TV series. I was very excited to do the Gojira reaction video, and at this time the Tenet review, that I'm going to continue doing a couple more videos on that subject. So today's turn is for Star Trek the Original Series, Season 1, Episodes 20 and 21, which are Court Martial and the Return of the Archons. So I'm going to start with Episode 20. So Episode 20 got 0 votes in the original list. And I can sort of tell why. Now, I am not going to say this is a bad episode at all. It doesn't have that much action, I would say. It does have some, but it's not what you would call, like, maybe Shore Leave or the Galileo 7, So I do understand why this will get 0 votes. Now, this type of episode has its own genre, which I would call the trial episode. So there are many TV series that have used the courtroom or the trial episode. Some examples would be Seinfeld's last episode that happened during a trial. Quantum Leap's So Help Me God was another trial episode. MacGyver's Rush to Judgment. And obviously there are tons of movies out there that work within a trial. For example, JFK, Few Good Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, My Cousin Vinny. The trial episode uses a narrative that can also help us to discover who committed the crime. In other cases, it's only the thread where all the drama will come to. So because this episode actually follows that kind of setting, that is trying to discover the murder, I actually enjoyed it from that part. But in all honesty, the episode is quite flat, very slow at some points, and I believe that I don't know, probably it showed some kind of writing problems or probably schedule problems, because the beginning goes very slowly while at the end it seems incredibly rushed. But for that, let's make a very quick recap. So the first thing we learn is that the Enterprise has gone through an iron storm, just lost a crewman, and it's down at this place for repairs. Starbase 11 is commanded by this man over here, Commodore Stone. After a very brief conversation between Kirk and Commodore Stone, we learn that Kirk had jettisoned the pod, causing the death of the crewman. After a very unusual 10-minute delay, Spock is beamed down to bring the report, and he seemed to wanted to say something to Kirk, but before he could say anything, Commodore Stone takes the report off his hands to play it immediately. This girl comes completely unannounced into the Commodore's office. And as soon as she enters, she starts shouting and screaming and crying and accusing Kirk of killing her father, the dead crewman. As if that weren't enough, Commodore Stone says that Kirk has indeed committed willful perjury according to what he's seen in the report, and now they will have to determine whether or not a court-martial is needed. And that's only the beginning. From here the story starts to get a little bit slower. In the first minutes we have a lot of information, but after the intro it starts to get pretty dull. There are some scenes that I have to admit they were definitely unneeded, while other scenes were actually quite necessary and we don't get to see them. The lack of some of these scenes make the episodes to seem a bit choppy, in my opinion, or kind of incomplete. But let me explain myself for a bit before you get all angry at me. Let's take, for example, this pub scene with Kirk and McCoy. In my opinion, this scene was absolutely unnecessary, and I'll describe it so you can see why. We see first that Kirk and McCoy enter and try to have a very casual conversation with a couple of guys that from a get-go look like they really don't like him. After a couple of lines here and there, the situation starts to get super awkward that even people look around him. And Kirk is just simply not going to take it, so he storms off the pub. Then this incredibly stunning lady comes into the pub, and the only thing we learn about her is that she knows Kirk. That's it. Of course, McCoy was not going to waste any time, so he buys her a drink. So back at the Commodore's office, we get a little more detailed information about the incident. The crucial question here is if Kirk jettisoned the pod before the red alert, causing the death of the crewmen. Trying to understand Kirk a little better, Commodore Stone suggests that probably he was too tired to the point of physical collapse and mental breakdown, so he probably just made an honest mistake. Of course, Kirk feels offended by this and he refuses this idea, and things again escalate to the point where we need another stare-down contest between the two of them, and Commodore Stone demands for court-martial. Back at the infamous pub, Kirk meets Ariel, the very nice lady we met before. Finally, we get to know what does she do in this story. Well, she's not only beautiful, but she's also a very brilliant lawyer. And she gives Kirk very detailed and especially useful information about how the prosecution will handle his case. She also recommends a very good lawyer, Mr. Coakley. She cannot take the case because she is in fact the prosecution against Kirk. So far, the pub scene is still unnecessary, but let's go back to this scene where we meet Mr. Coakley, the recommendation from Ariel. And this guy, let me tell you, he loves books. You see, he has many of them. Yeah, he loves books. And then finally the trial begins. So at some points the trial is very good, but in some others it only adds seconds and seconds of screen time filled with information that it's really not that necessary. Yes, we get to learn a lot about our characters in terms of actual titles, but for others we really don't care about their titles. You see, we have all these people here, plus Kirk, that will have to be cross-examined by the prosecution at the trial. Not her though. Now, when they introduce each character, we learn we kick off this trial with Mr. Spock's deposition that actually only serves as an opinion, even though that it was completely devoid of any emotion and full of logic. And the defense does nothing. Then we meet this very nice lady who happens to be the personal officer, but I can't remember what she said. Dr. McCoy is an expert in psychology, but his opinion only serves the prosecution's idea that Kirk actually hated Finney, the dead crewman, because he knew that Finney hated him first, so he had a probable cause for wanting him dead. Then it's finally Kirk's turn on the stand, and after many seconds listening to all his titles and awards and achievements, then we know that he still claims that he first sent the yellow alert, followed by the red alert, and then he jettisoned the pod. Then the prosecution shows this video of him pressing the yellow alert, but then he jettisons the pod without signaling the red alert. He is done. Back at his office, Mr. Coakley suggests that maybe he did have a mental breakdown and he jettisoned the pod, and if he pleased to that, he could probably get him off. But no, of course he's not going to take that, so he stands like Wonder Woman for a few seconds, and then he decides he's just going to face whatever consequences there have to come. He's going to take it like a man. He talks to Spock and he mentions the word chess, which... Finney's daughter has a sudden change of heart, and she begs Mr. Coakley to save Kirk's career. Without many options, Mr. Coakley realizes that he now has to come up with something completely new to win the case. Back at the ship, Mr. Spock discovers that the machine has been actually losing all the chess games, and this is supposed to be impossible since Mr. Spock had recently programmed the computer to play chess as well as he does, so there should be at least a draw. Even though they went immediately, they were too late to present this information to Mr. Coakley. And at this point, we finally get...
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
I wanted to state my terms. I do not care to work or live on any others. My terms are a man's right to exist for his own sake.
You think you're merely sending this splendid foot soldier back home to Argon with his tail between his legs, but I say you are executing his soul!
Trust me, I know that they are looking at me and thinking about it. So let's just get it out in the open. Let's get it out of the closet.
And until we can see each other as equals, justice is never going to be even-handed. It will remain nothing more than a reflection of our own prejudices.
Of their caliber. And which is in itself, gentlemen, a lie.
In 1964, the correct ignition timing would be 4 degrees before tap dead center.
And Harry, Jimmy, Trent, wherever you are out there, fuck you too!
Let's go back to the episode. Mr. Coakley delights us with a very compelling speech about human rights, and he convinces the court to go to the ship so that he can present this new evidence. Mr. Spock explains the anomaly in the computer. Having won 5 games himself, he realized that there must be something wrong with the computer since he programmed it to play as well as he did. So instead of winning, there should be draws. Someone must have been tampering with the computer, which sparks the great idea in Mr. Coakley's mind. Finney is not dead. In all honesty, I never saw this coming, so I'm gonna have to give it a thumbs up. The cart is later taken to the bridge where Kirk, Spock and McCoy make another demonstration. They make the computer reproduce every heartbeat of every person aboard the starship. The sound seems to be a little bit overwhelming, by the way. Then they show a white noise device which will block every heartbeat as soon as it is approached to someone's heart. We actually see him going person after person to cancel the sound. Every single person on the ship. When he finishes, there's still one heartbeat sound left, and it is assumed it's Finney's. After a few moments of recognition, Kirk takes on the responsibility to find Finney himself. Then he heads straight to the engineering area and he tries to reason with him, and then he creepily appears behind him, like with those crazy eyes of him. I mean, take a look at him. Take a look at his crazy eyes. Finney has a strong case of if I can't have it, then nobody can either, so he decides to destroy this starship as well as Kirk's career. He messed around with the ship's circuits and now everyone's life is at risk since its orbit is decaying. Kirk tells Finney that his daughter's on his way to see him. This makes Finney go absolutely nuts and the fight begins. And yes, I know I criticize fights a lot, but I mean, please tell me, who is this guy? Who is this guy? After winning the fight, Kirk says off-screen that Finney had just confessed what he'd done with the ship, and we don't get to see that confession or any repent if there's any, because this bar scene was more important, I guess. Kirk fixes the ship and Lieutenant Uhura puts on her badass suit and she navigates the ship, bringing everyone on board back to safety. The last thing we see is Ariel and Kirk saying goodbye. Kirk kisses Ariel, and nobody cared. If you ever wanted to see Mr. Coakley or Finney's daughter again, well, sorry, because this full white noise device scene was more important, you see. And that's it, that's the episode. I have to say, my favorite part is seeing Lieutenant Uhura taking complete control of the ship. So, where is Mr. Coakley? 10 minutes before the end of this episode, he only says, I have to go, I'll be right back, but he never came back. We never get to see Finney's daughter either, even though the idea was to make him believe that she would be on the ship, which obviously she was not going to, but I think that the ending doesn't include her when it actually should have. I definitely have to say that I missed both characters at the very end of this episode. The final confrontation against Finney, in my opinion, was a bit rushed. But in general, I have to say, I enjoyed the episode because I never expected this twist. Now, in the case of the return of the Archons, this episode was incredibly weird, but at the same time quite interesting. This episode reminded me of movies, for example, The Purge, and other horror movies like The Children of the Corn. So this quick recap. We see Sulu and Lieutenant O'Neill running away from men in robes in this strange planet with weird clothes. Lieutenant O'Neill runs away, but Sulu stays and he is zapped by these men with robes with some sort of baton, and then he is beamed up to the Enterprise. Sulu is different at this point. He speaks about a man or something called Landru, and he also says that everything is beautiful with this man. So at this point, whatever happened to Sulu is obviously something that this man in robes did to him. A party of 6 is beamed down to the surface, and from the get-go, Mr. Spock notices this content but empty expression on the people around them. They find a very friendly man, and he speaks about a festival that is about to begin. He offers accommodations from a very close friend of his, but they need to hurry for the festival to begin. Just before they start asking a little more about this festival, the clock hits the 6 o'clock and people starts going absolutely crazy. And I mean doing all sorts of different things like fighting each other or kissing one another or carrying them in their bags and breaking windows and going into this frenzy. I am not kidding, you have to see this for yourselves. The crew finds shelter in a place that was nearby. It happens to be an inn. The owner, Roger, explains them that there's a day of the festival and that he can give them accommodations. There are 3 elderly men, but one of them seems to be quite strict and he does not approve of them not being at the festival since they are of young age. He decides to do something about it. There's this element that always happens. When there's a cult or a sect, there's always this one fanatic. I mean, they're all fanatics, but there's this one that is always obnoxiously fanatic. Kirk wants to know a little more about the festival and the Landru person that Sulu once mentioned. This man seems astonished to see that these people have never heard of Landru. While they speak, though, the festival is still going. People are going insane and mad, and they are still in this frenzy, breaking everything as they go by. The festival happens to last until the very next morning at 6 o'clock. They try to get more information, but this fanatic brings the men in robes and try to arrest them. They kill the 3rd man and they demand Kirk to go with them so that they can be absorbed, but he refuses to go and plainly say so. This causes a conflict between the man in the robes. Now, this part was amazing, like seeing them so confused because they can't understand the person actually disobeying. Now, I had to stop for a moment during my reaction to see this guy, and I do believe that this man was actually in the cage. So I had to compare, and I just need your approval. Is he the same man from the cage? The crew follow Roger to a safe place and they try to go inconspicuous, but the rest of the population happen to be a hive mind. They stop what they do very creepily. They take rocks and sticks and go straight at them. The whole idea of having a full town coming at you with stones and sticks like an angry mob is quite scary. Hive minds have always been very scary, and it's a very recurring theme in horror movies. They make themselves way through an alley, but as they continue, Dr. McCoy recognizes Lieutenant O'Neill that is fallen on the ground. Kirk decides to bring him along with them, but Roger says this is dangerous since he's already part of the hive mind and can function as a beacon to be found. Back at the shelter, Roger tells him a little more history about this Landru character, and it turns out that he's been having control of virtually every single person for over 6,000 years. But there are some people that seem to be immune to this absorption and cannot be part of this hive. But Landru finds them, and we see this Duran Duran's prequel projection in the wall. And they realize that they are only recordings, there's no real conversation with this projection. He immobilized the entire team by sending a high-pitched frequency that nobody can stand. Everyone ends up in a dungeon, but Dr. McCoy is not with them. He is returned though, but absorbed, just like Sulu, speaking about how beautiful Landru is. They take Kirk into the chamber to be absorbed, but before he is taken in, one of the men in robes is replaced by this man, Marplin, and now we don't know what will happen. We see Kirk again crossing paths with Spock, and he speaks just as strange as Dr. McCoy and Zulu have been speaking. This leaves Spock quite perplexed. While it's his turn, Marplin actually deactivates the system and lets Spock go free. He explains that he is the third person in Reger's triad, and actually Kirk is not being absorbed either. They try to have a conversation at the dungeon to create a plan away from Dr. McCoy's ears. Marplin and Reger also go to the dungeon and try to speak to create the plan. For some reason now they are very afraid about the consequences when they have all this time asked for the Archons to come and save them. Unfortunately, Dr. McCoy gets to listen to them and sends the alarm by shouting and calling the attention of the men in robes. They are ambushed by Spock and Kirk, who take their clothes, and since now Reger just bailed out, Marplin is the only one that actually takes them to the hall. This is an important place because it's the only place where they can actually listen to Landru's voice. They have another problem. The ship is having problems with a very strong being that is coming from the surface of the planet, and they have to hurry up before they destroy the ship. Back at the hall, the projection of Landru reappears in front of a wall, and they understand they have to now shoot at the wall so that they can reveal the inside of this special place. And it is the very computer that Landru first built to continue ruling the planet. This computer has one directive, which is keeping the good for the body. From here, the computer and Kirk get into an argument trying to define what is the good.
The greater good.
Landru's computer says that by keeping everything under control and giving it continuation, it actually creates the good. But Kirk says that by controlling everybody and not letting them have creativity is actually harming the body, and thus the computer must be destroyed in order to perpetuate the good.
Shut it!
The computer destroys itself after this conflict and everything goes back to normal. Sulu is back on his job, and they decide to leave a team of experts to solve the problems of 6,000 years of mass manipulation. And that's it. So yes, I may be oversimplifying this episode for the sake of timing, or maybe because some parts of this episode are very flat too. Many dialogues, many silent scenes. And I actually have to be quite confused of some changes, like why did Reger suddenly change his heart when he was so determined to change the course of his planet? Or whatever happened about that festival? We don't know why it happens or how often it happens, you know? But in all terms, this episode is very intriguing and mysterious and has this vibe of a horror movie that I really enjoyed. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and remember that you can also follow me on Instagram. Remember that the reaction videos for these two episodes, number 20 and 21, are available at Patreon. You can go see the link in the description box below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you want to follow me on Instagram and see photos of myself and my dogs and a couple more plans I have for this channel, you can follow me here. My next reaction video will be Season 1, Episode 22, Space Seed. Thank you again for joining me on this episode. Take care, God bless, and bye-bye.